most of you are at least casual observers of the President's policy in the Western Hemisphere. He made a trip there recently and managed in all of his prepared texts not to mention Venezuela or the threat that we're facing there from China and Iran. Let me just say that I was Assistant Secretary and Ambassador to the OAS during a period of time, and the Bush administration was otherwise preoccupied on other things. But the President cared very much about the issues, and he managed to construct in that period of time some of the best relations that we've had in modern history with Brazil, a country that is usually seen things as a zero-sum game vis-a-vis the United States. And that was primarily because of the President's very good relationship with Lula, a man to the left. He established extraordinarily important partnership alliance with Colombia and with Mexico, with the new President. Even on the way out the door, President Bush showed real leadership in stepping up and saying we have to help Mexico, and developed the Merida plan. And in return, the new President there, Calderon, was open like never before to U.S. cooperation across the board to confront this common threat that we face of the narco-terrorist groups that terrorize really both of our countries in different ways. Those are really the key relationships in this hemisphere. Throw in Canada as an important trade partner and others, a NATO partner. Those are the three most important relationships in Latin America, and they've wrecked those relationships significantly. We saw President Calderon coming here a couple of weeks ago to complain about the lack of real cooperation. I mentioned the Merida plan, $1.4 billion. The Obama folks have had 2 years to spend that money and have spent about $500 million of it. Money isn't everything, but cooperation, diplomatically, law enforcement, all of that's important. And it was undermined to such a significant extent that President Calderon used very undiplomatic language to explain the problems that he was having with our ambassador there, who by his the way he's operated with different agencies in the country, undermined Calderon's effort to make it one fight in Mexico. And eventually President Obama's ambassador there, Carlos Pascual, had to quit, and he'll be leaving soon. This is a nadir, really, in the relationship in the last 15 years with Mexico since the passage of NAFTA, actually. With Brazil, you saw Lula in his last couple of years wander off really without the relationship with President Bush as ballast in that relationship, and undermined our efforts, for example, at the UN on Iran sanctions with this sort of wildcat diplomacy, making common cause with Turkey and others to give Iran sort of a way out, which they had to step up, and Hillary Clinton had to step up and save that process. I'm a little more optimistic about what our relationship will be with Dilma Rousseff, the new president of Brazil. That's an important country, and we have to have good relations. But frankly, it requires some presidential attention. And there are economic and political benefits from that relationship with South America's largest country and one of the most dynamic economies in the world. But we need real leadership from the president. He can't phone it in. And then finally with Colombia, we see some examples right now when almost at this very moment, Hugo Chavez is going to be landing in Bogota, where he has warmed relations up considerably with Colombia because the Colombians have no backing, not much backing, from the United States. They just do not feel that and I had this conversation in October with President Santos, and he said, I can't confront Chavez because no one has my back. And so what are the practical implications of punting on the free trade agreement and on sort of a hostile relationship within the State Department toward Colombia because of the historically close relationship with the Bush administration? What are the practical implications? It's in the Wall Street Journal today. The fact that we're going to lose the option of custody of Walid Makled, a narco-trafficker, king of kingpins is what the U.S. attorney has called him. He's in custody in Colombia today, captured by under a warrant from the DEA because he's wanted in New York for drug trafficking. He also has ties to Hezbollah, which I've identified in a Washington Post editorial 6 or 8 days ago. An important network of Hezbollah in South America, and he's part of that, and he can tell us more about that. But we will not get custody of him because instead, President Santos has committed, President Santos of Colombia has committed to sending him to Venezuela instead. Venezuela wants him on murder charges. He's accused 40 senior officials of the Venezuelan government in complicity in narco trafficking. And we're not going to get custody of him because the administration punted on this. Our ambassador refused to press Santos on this because they were perfectly comfortable with Santos trying to warm relations up with Venezuela. And they've gained points in the Obama administration for ignoring the abiding threat that Venezuela and Chavez pose to our interests. And so I hope that with my statements on the connection to terrorism, to Hezbollah, to jumpstart a process where we will make an effort, a renewed diplomatic effort to get our hands on this guy. And we need him not just for the intelligence that he has to offer, but as a witness to press, I know, a half-dozen cases that the DEA is prepared to bring against senior military and officials and others in Chavez regime. So those are tangible results of a lack of attention from this administration and having deluded themselves that all they have to do is ignore Chavez and he'll behave, or don't provoke him, and the problem will go away. But let's talk very, very briefly about how wrong that is. Chavez has built important strategic relationships with rivals or enemies, outright enemies of the United States: Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. Just take, for example, the Chinese are eating our lunch on Venezuela as a source of petroleum. 6 or 8 years ago, we imported about 1.7 million barrels a day of oil from Venezuela. The numbers just came out last week. We're now at about 750,000 barrels a day, almost a million down. The Chinese, about 5 years ago, were at 40,000 barrels a day. They're now at 600,000 and on their way up. They're building the refineries and the tankers that will carry Venezuelan oil to China and replace us completely, which means that because that's the way Chavez wants it. He doesn't want to have any dependence on the United States as a market for that oil. And the Chinese are voracious consumers. We understand we get oil on the market and we'll find other sources, and we have time to do that. But what it means is that Chavez has every intention of shoving U.S. oil companies out of Venezuela. And they'll be surprised, I guess, even though I wrote about this 2 years ago for AEI. The other relationship, Iran, I think is very troubling. One of my colleagues at AEI said that based on what he knows from me about the nature of the relationship and the depth of that relationship, that this would be one of Iran's most important, if not most important, relationship in the world with Venezuela. They use Venezuela to evade international sanctions that are meant to control its rogue nuclear program. They are mining uranium today in Venezuela. They are using this also to obtain nuclear technology. They are using it as a platform, Venezuela, as a platform to project the Hezbollah network into South America. Chavez's DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission in Damascus, is a man named Ghazi Atef Salameh Nasruddin Abu Ali, a nice Venezuelan chap. He's actually became a Venezuelan 10 years ago, and this is the Venezuelan dream. Now he's the #2 in their embassy in Syria. He coordinates a Hezbollah network in the Western Hemisphere with Iranian support. And I wrote about this in the Washington Post. I never thought I'd say this. I didn't even used to read the Post. Now I'm actually writing in the Post. But about the terror summit the head of Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, meeting in Caracas right under the noses of the Obama administration in August of last year. These are people that don't leave their Middle Eastern layers for fear of assassination. Most wanted people, and they're being feted in Caracas. And this isn't a social call. It is to plan operations in our hemisphere. So this is the troubling legacy of neglect. And frankly, if it weren't for the United States Congress, we wouldn't be getting anywhere on this, because you have leaders like Gillian Slaton, Connie Mack, and others who are stepping up to the plate and forcing the administration to focus on this problem. Law enforcement also, the DEA in particular, is trying to get its arms around this issue and put a lot of resources behind that. But we need Treasury to get into the game, to take a look at Venezuela's indispensable role in the support for terrorism and for Iran in the Western Hemisphere. I'll stop there and take any questions you might have. The fact that the United States is in a market for 70% of Venezuela's oil, or was a couple of years ago, and it's dwindling, is a leash on Chavez. And we won't even jerk that leash because we're afraid of what he might do. But the problem is he wants the independence to continue with the relationship with Iran, with Cuba, with China, with Russia, and doesn't want to have any dependence on the market. So we have basically punted on Venezuela because we want this, as to quote a State Department official June of last year when they broke their silence about Venezuela, they said, we hope to continue our mutually beneficial oil relationship. Well, guess what? Chavez doesn't want to. So stop pulling our punches. I'm not saying confrontation or a war or anything like that, but at least understand what he's up to and organize some sort of response internationally to the wrongdoings going on in the region. The real predicament on China, if there's a transition, is that the new government in Venezuela will owe $40 billion to the Chinese at prices that are below market rate, that the Chinese have demanded of Chavez, and he is so desperate for cash that he's committed them for 20 years, giving oil at a rock bottom rate, and so the Chinese are shaking them down, and then we're headed for a confrontation, because I believe for him to meet his objectives, he's going to have to shove American companies and essentially expropriate, major expropriations of U.S. property, the likes of which we haven't seen in 50 years in this hemisphere.
We have time for one more question on the left there.
There was a report yesterday about a possible bill circulating through Congress on designating the drug cartels in Mexico as foreign terrorist organizations. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I believe that to the extent that it allows law enforcement the ability to use more of its tools to freeze assets, to arrest people, to restrict their movements and all, that it would be an important objective. And one final comment on the Mexico thing. The Justice Department said last year that the largest organized crime threat in the United States that we confront are Mexican drug trafficking organizations. So Calderon is literally fighting the other end of the same monster that through 1 million gang members in the United States threaten our people, and so cocaine into this hemisphere. So that's really our fight. So we need to do everything we can, but it's not enough to just designate them. We need to have the intelligence resources, the law enforcement resources, and the political will to do something about confronting these folks. Great. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much.